Welcome everyone back to another great video going through a very common question
Yes.
we get about how to treat your principal residence, your home when it comes to retirement. We'll start with a little bit of data here, and this
Mhm.
comes from HOOP, the Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan. They commission advocates data. It is the Ontario Pension Plan, but they ask Canadians across the board, retirees. They have the Canadian Retirement Survey, and this is what is really driving this video. 42% up from 38
Yes.
of homeowners, they plan to rely on the sale of their house to fund their retirement.
Wow.
And if you look specifically at those 55 to 64, so arguably those that are about to retire or just retired, that group is now up to 40%, up from 34. So it jumped. That group, 40%, plan to rely on their home to fund their retirement. So we're seeing a big
Huge.
increase in how many people say, hey, I got a house. I need that equity to pay for retirement. So let's dive into some details here.
Yeah. And I guess the biggest part and the biggest reason why we're seeing this is that when you take a look at somebody's net worth, what you're finding now is that roughly 50% or more
Yeah.
is tied up into real estate. And normally that's your principal residence. That's what you've got. So if that's where the majority of your net worth is, why can't I use some of that net worth? That's got to be a scenario that you want to take a look at. So over half the net worth, as we said, is there. So you look at 2020, it was 51%. You look at 2023, 53.2, and it's almost the same in 2024. And you're talking a net worth of $1 million. That is substantial money.
Hmm.
And if I can access some of that in my retirement, that's going to help me do what I want to do when I'm there and allow me to access a lot of other options.
Yeah, that answers the question as to why is it jumping? Well, if house values are going up and you got a lot of net worth tied up with the real estate, people probably want to use it. That's
Yep.
really
It's
the
a net worth.
solution there. That comes from Statistics Canada. That's household numbers. And how would you go about using it? Well, the first bit, our preference is not
Yes.
to
Don't.
use it.
Don't.
That's the preference when crafting a financial plan. We like to just put the house aside and say, all right, we got these pensions, we have our own savings. We'll use that to fund the retirement income. Yes, the house will be part of the plan, but we don't want to depend on it to
No.
pay the day-to-day bills and to actually fund the retirement lifestyle. We like to have it aside. That gives your plan a much greater cushion.
Yep.
When you get that equity there, often we'll assume that home equity will fund whatever the next step is. Because sometimes folks pass away in their homes.
Exactly.
Often there is a next step where they sell and maybe they rent or they get a condo or they go to assisted living or a care facility. And we usually assume in our plan, well, the home equity will cover the cost of whatever that next step is. There's also a couple of other reasons why we prefer to do this.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that, really it's hard to predict what things are going to go on down the road. I mean, if you take a look at the 80s, house prices rarely did anything. They stayed flat for the entire decade. But then you get into the 2000s, all of a sudden everything's shooting through the roof. It's hard to predict that. And again, where are rental costs going to be? Are we going to have huge inflation, which makes vast increases into your rent? Or is rent going to stay fairly stable, which means that if your house has gone up, we're going to have a little bit better, harder to do that. The other thing is principal residence is a tax efficient way to start passing. So if you're using your RSPs, if you're using non-registered assets to cover what your expenses are in retirement, you want to leave something for the next generation, principal residence sold, no taxes. It all goes to your heir. You provide them with that estate that they're really looking for.
So if you're looking at tax efficient ways to get money to the next generation, spending your RSPs throughout retirement
Perfect.
and then passing along that house is very tax efficient. So
Yep.
that could be another reason why. If you really have to, and this does happen, we'll do financial plans and sometimes the numbers just don't jive. Not enough savings or pensions to cover the lifestyle, and we'll have to tap into some of that equity. If that is the case, conservative assumptions is really key.
Best way to
We don't want to say, hey, you got to get $2 million for the house for $1.5 million. Let's do the opposite. Let's assume a lower number
Exactly.
for how much we're going to actually get from that house and still build in a cushion. So even if I'll assume a lower number for what we'll receive in proceeds, let's just target half that value as an example. So we don't want the plan to be very dependent
No.
on the house sale. Also in terms of timing, right? We got to pick a time. When is the house going to be sold? With 10 years into retirement, we sell, we get that cash influx that kind of covers the next number of years of retirement. We don't want that date to be so dependent for
Yep.
the plan. So if it doesn't happen in 10 years, suddenly the plan doesn't work, well, we need to have some wiggle room there. Those are the cushions. That's the conservative assumptions we make if we really have to include it in the plan. This all came from the data. We also get lots of questions on this. If someone's sitting there with a question, how are they getting answered?
They go to chatwithclintonandkevin.com. By all means, send us any questions on your house and your retirement. If you want to know anything more about how to get access to it, what are options to deal with, we're more than happy. Or any other financial questions that you have. We want to take any of them that we can in. They come directly to Clinton and myself. We will be the ones getting back to you in a timely manner to make sure that we can answer these questions and make sure that you get all the information you need. But besides that,
We do have a newsletter. There's a link in the description. So if you like videos like this, we have a newsletter that goes out usually weekly. So you can get similar financial planning tips in your inbox. You can sign up for that if you like. So we talked about why folks are probably using their home or just thinking of using their home for retirement, our preference, some conservative assumptions if you really have to. Now we can look at the practical ways. How do you actually get the equity out of your home? And usually it's a reverse mortgage or maybe a home equity line of credit.
Yeah, those tend to be the two most popular areas that you want to deal with. Now, they're very similar in the same thing. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking a loan off your home. It's like getting a mortgage back to yourself and being able to take that money and spend it the way you want to deal with it, whether it's as a lump sum, whether it's taking it out monthly, depending on how you've got the situation. There are some tweaks and differences between the two. In the reverse mortgage, you have to be 55 plus to be able to get it. You don't have to produce any sort of income to be able to maintain that. They usually pay you that stuff monthly. It's all taken cash free, but they do charge you what tends to be a higher interest rate on that money as opposed to the home equity line of credit, where in the home equity, you have to qualify to be able to get a home equity line of credit. They usually do require an income scenario because there are monthly payments that are made for this. But normally, whereas the reverse mortgage gives you about 55% of your home, you can get possibly 65 to 75% of the value of your home out of a home equity line of credit. Those are just some of the basic differences that go on, but they basically are both the same method where you're taking money out of the home by basically taking a loan against it, and eventually it'll be paid off by the time the home is sold.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few of the nuances here, the home equity line of credit, you have to qualify. And you have to service the home equity line of credit, which means you have to make monthly interest payments at a minimum throughout the course. And the bank wants to make sure you have an income in order to do that. So typically you need a job to get a home equity line of credit. So if you're in retirement, you might not be able to set one up. The bank might say no, and you might be forced to use the reverse mortgage to access the equity. Because the reverse mortgage, you don't need an income because you actually don't service the loan. You don't make interest payments as you go. The bank says eventually you're going to move, sell the property, or die. And at that time, we're going to collect what we owe. We're going to take the principal plus all of the interest you've owed along the way. So you just spend the money. You don't actually have to make any payments to the bank. That's right. Until the end when the property is sold in the reverse mortgage scenarios. Those are certainly differences you have to be aware of. But you're right. The basic idea is you're taking a loan against the house and then you're spending that to fund the retirement. A few considerations here. We always say this, the plan is going to be key. And the part of the plan specifically for retirement is really going to depend on your budget. You don't need it to be to the penny accurate, but you need a good ballpark for your lifestyle.
Yep.
And then you can work backwards from there to see really what is sustainable and what makes sense. And then once you have kind of a realistic budget and a good plan, you can see the best way to fund it and to see if you have to use a reverse mortgage or home equity line of credit. Although we encourage folks to consider that as kind of a last option and use more traditional tools, pensions and savings before you get to the home equity.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, when you're dealing with that, always take a look at the home equity as your last line of defense, as it were. Again, what we're looking at for seniors, basically, the reverse mortgage is only about 1% of the senior community to actually deal with this. Now, granted, it has been increasing over the last number of years between inflation and higher costs and everything else. That's going on, but it's still a relatively small part. And that rationale goes with everything that we've been saying, and that use everything else before you look at this as a method. And again, just make sure that you're reviewing your plan. And if you don't have one, create a plan. A financial plan is the most important part that will help you with all of this and to see whether or not your home has to be part of your retirement.
Yeah, we mentioned the home can be a great way to pass along tax-free to the next generation as part of your estate. There's lots of misconceptions about estate. This video right here clears all of those up, So click on it. We'll see you there.
Take care.